Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm, warm welcome to Greg Braden. Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. I have to ask, are you as happy to be in this room as I am to be in this room right now? I don't know, you'd have to be really happy to be happier than I am, because I've literally waited my entire life to be able to share with you and say to you what I'm about to share and say in this program. This is, as some of you know, this is the 30th year that I've offered this material in one form or another. My first program in front of a live audience, I didn't even have a book, was in Denver, Colorado in 1986. And I was still in the corporations at that time, and I was doing this at nights and on the weekends. And I'm going to talk to you in a moment about how that transition came about from me working in the corporations and doing this part-time to what I'm doing now. But what I'd like to do, I just want to begin by talking about what this program is really all about. In its truest sense, science is designed to be constantly updated with new information as we ask science to tell us more about ourselves, our relationship to our bodies, to one another, to the earth, to the past, to the future, how things work in this world. Science finds new answers, and they offer those answers. And sometimes we, maybe not you and me, but sometimes we as a society, we have such an attachment to another answer that we like that we're reluctant to embrace what the new discoveries are telling us. And because of that, there is a tendency to become stuck in a story, a scientific story of us and our relationship to the world. And if you were educated in the West, anytime in the last 150 years, what I want to say is you and myself, we're in this together. We are the product of a way of thinking based in scientific assumptions that now have been proven to be false assumptions. We know they're false in the peer-reviewed science, yet there is a reluctance, and in some cases a flat-out resistance, to share them in the mainstream media, in the classrooms, and the textbooks. So what that means is that we are now educating entire new generations with the same thinking of unsustainable principles of economics, of energy, of agriculture, of social interactions, families, relationships, the same unsustainable ways of thinking. We are steeping a new generation in those unsustainable ways of thinking while we're asking that generation to solve the problems that we are leaving behind, and those problems exist because of the unsustainable ways of thinking that we embraced as we created the world around us. So science, I just want to begin by saying I think science is good. I am a scientist. I'm a trained earth scientist, a geologist. And I also want to be the first to say here, to acknowledge that science does not have all the answers. Science tells us how things work, the nuts and bolts of how atoms and subatomic particles and molecules and cells, how they work. Science tells us how the things work. But science cannot tell us how to apply that knowledge in our lives. That is where I believe that we owe it to ourselves to honor the wisdom of all of those who have come before us, the wisdom of 5,000 years of ancient and indigenous traditions. They didn't know the science so much, but they understood us, and they understood our relationship to the world. They knew how to survive difficult times, and rather than spending the time to understand why things are the way they are, our ancestors preferred to apply those understandings in their lives so that they would have healthier lives for themselves, their families, their communities. So for me, this wisdom that we are going to explore in this program, the wisdom of science and spirituality, science tells us how things work, and the spiritual principles help us to understand how we apply that knowledge in our lives. In its truest sense, spirituality, I just want to make a distinction here. I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about spiritual principles. Spirituality is the exploration of us, our connection to ourselves, to one another, to the world. And the spiritual principles existed long before religions ever came along. The religions came later and wrapped the rules and the dogma around more ancient understandings. And as you'll see as we go through the program, that's why I have preferred to go directly to the source of this ancient wisdom. Some of the most isolated, magnificent, remote, beautiful, pristine places remaining on the earth today. Usually they're on mountaintops, somewhere very few people go, because it's in those places that this wisdom of our ancestors is least disturbed by the modern world, and it's in those places we find it more intact. And I'm not suggesting that we want to go and live like our ancestors lived. What I am saying is I believe they knew things. They understood principles in their time that we may apply in our lives today. We can take those principles and apply them in a smart way, in a healthy and a responsible way in a modern world, going through some of the same problems that our ancestors experienced, such as climate change. We're going to talk about in just a few moments. So in its truest sense, spirituality is about us. It's about our connection to ourselves, one another, and the world. Interestingly, science is the same thing. Science is the exploration of us. It's all about us. Our connection to ourselves, to one another in the world, how things work. So for me, the marriage of these two, if we can marry the best science of the 20th and now the 21st century to 5,000 years of wisdom and spiritual traditions from those who have come before us, maybe, just maybe, we give ourselves an evolutionary edge that our ancestors did not have because they didn't have the science. Maybe we give ourselves the evolutionary edge to move beyond the hardship and the suffering brought about by the cycles of change that we're experiencing now, and for the first time in recorded human history, not just survive, but transcend. Transform our lives, transform our world, and transcend these challenges because we have become more knowledgeable about ourselves and our relationship to the world. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about how I arrived at the place where I am today. It's a question that comes up often. And the reason I'm going to do it now is because I think it will help to understand, as we go through this program, why I've arranged the material the way I have, why I'm coming at it from this perspective. So I'll start at the beginning. I was born in a very conservative community, right in the middle of this big, beautiful country of ours, right in the middle of the United States in northern Missouri, just outside of Kansas City. And I have to tell you, when I was born, it was in the early 1950s, science and spirituality were not things that people talked about very much. It wasn't a hot topic of conversation, I'll just put it that way. At the breakfast table or around the water fountain or in the locker room at school, people didn't talk about it. And because they didn't, I made an assumption when I was young. And my assumption was this. I believed that because people weren't talking about it, it meant everyone believed the same thing. So there was no need to talk about it. And I believed that they believed what I believed, and that is that I have never made a distinction between science and spirituality. As a child, I've wanted to either be a scientist or a rock star since I was 5 years old. And here's the reason why. I looked at my world at 5 years old, and I said, what is it that I could offer in this world that would really, really, truly touch people's hearts and make a positive difference, a powerful, healthy, positive change in the world that would be lasting? And the two places where I saw that happen were rock concerts, where 50, 60, 70,000 people would be in a stadium, and they would be so moved by the music. So I became a musician at a very early age. I am today. I continue. I'm a guitar player and a flute player, Native American flutes. All of these cultures that I explore, there are two things they all have in common. They all have tea, and they all have flutes. They all have musical instruments. And I collect both everywhere I go. But the music I saw moved people from a soul level. On the one hand. On the other hand, what I saw was that when people left the concert, there was something missing. The only way they could have that feeling again was to go and buy the record at that time, the vinyl, or the 8-track tape. Back in, they didn't have those back in the 60s. And I began to look at how people use words. speakers, powerful motivational speakers. And I saw them also filling stadiums and touching people's hearts and their souls in a really powerful way. And the beauty was that even after the program was complete and people left, it wasn't that they had to go and buy the music or buy the program again, because they had heard something that touched them and changed something within them in a way that was lasting. And it was for that reason I had to make a choice. Was I going to be a musician or some kind of a researcher, an author, and a speaker? And which one would be my life's work or which one become a hobby? And I'm still exploring that right now. I think there's room for both. So I was blessed to be raised in this very conservative community where people didn't talk about these things. And I'll just tell you a little bit about my personal life because I think it's important here. I come from a very dysfunctional family, an alcoholic family. My father left our family when I was 10 years old, and for me it was a tremendous blessing. And it forced our family, a small family. It's my mother, a younger brother, and myself. Mom raised the two boys alone. I have a younger brother 4 years younger than myself. And it forced us onto a journey. We were broke. We had so very little money. Mom hadn't been working. She had been a homemaker. And all of a sudden, she found herself trying to make a living and support two boys. And this was in the mid-1960s. It was a very difficult time. We ended up in low-income housing, government-subsidized housing. We moved frequently. I went to two junior high schools, two different high schools. Every time I moved, this was the blessing for me. Every time I moved, I made new friends, and I learned how to do that. And my friends would invite me into their homes and into their lives, and part of that was their religious and spiritual practices. So I would be invited to the mosque, I would be invited to the synagogue, I would be invited to the cathedral. My native friends would invite me into their native ceremonies in the kivas. And I became just as comfortable in a cathedral or a mosque or a synagogue as I was in a church, a cathedral, or in a native kiva, because I began to recognize that everyone was pretty much talking about the same thing from different perspectives. However, I also recognized quickly that no one perspective had all the answers. And that was important because we all learn differently. We all learn differently, and that's going to be reflected in the program that we're doing here, because I know some people are more left brain, some people are more right brain. Well, I made the assumption that science and spirituality were the same, and everyone believed as I did, and it wasn't until I was in the corporations that I found nothing could be further from the truth. People did talk about these things around the water fountain in very heated discussions, and I was actually told that I had to make a choice. And the way I was told, it almost sounded biblical, because I was told, Greg, you cannot serve two masters at the same time. You have to make a choice. Are you going to follow the path of science, or are you going to follow the path of spirituality? Well, I was working during the Cold War years, behind the scenes, during one of the most frightening times in the history of our world, when the two former superpowers, the former USSR and the former United States of America, had the nuclear arsenals with the power to destroy this world many times over. It was an insane time. And I asked a question. I said, what if I do not choose? What if I don't make a choice between science or spirituality? I said, what if we marry these two great ways of knowing, each of which is incomplete unto itself, into a wisdom, a combined wisdom that's greater than either science could be all by itself or that spirituality could be all by itself? Where would that lead us? Would it help us to overcome the differences that have separated us in the past and have led to the great wars of the 20th, and now we're in the 21st century, where so many people have suffered and died? And we're certainly seeing a replay of this in the world again, early in the 21st century. So that was my question. I was told I had to make a choice, and when I chose, it angered my supervisors. I'm just looking for the best way to say what I'm going to say to you here. So let me share with you what happened. I was called into the office of my higher-up, and the first thing he said, he was behind a desk at first, and I was standing in front of the desk, and he said, so I understand you're leaving this corporation. He said, what are you going to do? What competitor are you going to go with? And I said, well, I'm not going with a competitor. I'm going to write a book. And he said, well, that's good. What are you going to do for a living? And I hadn't thought that part through very well. And I said, I'm going to try to write a book. Then he got a little agitated, and he said, what gives you the right to turn your back on this company that has been so good to you? He said, you are on the fast track in this company. That was news to me. Nobody ever told me I was on the fast track. Not that it would have made a difference, but I said, really? I was surprised to hear that. He said, and I want you, just listen to the languaging. He said, you've got it made in this company. He said, you've got good benefits, you've got good pay, you've got job security, longevity. Listen to the language. He said, all you have to do, he thought he was telling me a secret, all you have to do is ride it out for 30 more years. And you've got it made. Okay, have you ever asked the universe for a sign? Anybody ever asked the universe for a sign? Yes, no, a sign? Okay, have you ever asked the universe for a sign and then wondered if the sign that the universe gave you is really the sign that you're supposed to see? How do you know when your sign is the sign? Have you ever wondered that? Okay, that's what has just happened right here. When he said, all you have to do is write it out for 30 more years, I said, that's what I needed to hear. I said, thank you for that. I said, I need to hear that because I could never work for a place where I'm simply writing it out. That's not what I believe my life is all about. Then he got really angry, and he got up from behind his desk. He walked in front of the desk. He got right in my face, his P's and his S's I was wearing, okay? You know what that is. Now he's really, really upset. And he's saying, and very condescending, he said, son, if you turn your back on me today, if you walk out that door, I will personally see to it, not only will you never work in this company again, not only will you ever work in this industry again, he said, I will personally see to it that you never have a job doing the kinds of things that you're doing right now. You will never, ever, ever be able to work in this way again. I said, oh God, thank you. I said, I asked the universe for a sign, and I thought what you said before was my sign, and now I know this was really the sign, because I could never, in good conscience, I could never work simply doing the things that you're asking me to do just to write it out. And with that kind of thinking, someone who would blackball me from the industry. And I left, I'll tell you, it was 1 o'clock, March 17th, 1990 was the day that I left that industry and walked out the door. And I want to round out this story. I want you to have a good feeling about this because this is the way the universe works. The universe is happy about these things. The man that said those things and was angry on that day, when I go now to Denver, Colorado to offer these programs, he's on my front row. He is a number one fan, and he has said to me, this is what he said. He said, Greg, now I understand. He said, it was a different time. We were at war, and we needed what you had to offer. And he said, this is another time, and we're in a different kind of war, and we still need what you have to offer. And thank you for having the courage to say to me what you said to me and to follow your heart on that day. So we are friends. It has a happy ending, and that's the way it all works out sometimes. That's my story about signs in the universe. Thank you. So this program, is it about science or spirituality? From my perspective, the best way for me to empower you is by marrying these two great ways of knowing into a single wisdom. I've been invited in a single program to encapsulate everything that I've offered in live audiences and through my books in the last 30 years. So it's almost like if God said to me, Greg, you have one day on earth to offer a program, and you can say whatever it is that you would like to say that you feel would empower, benefit, strengthen, and heal the people of the earth. And then you can't say it to them anymore. What would that be? And with that thinking in mind, that was my through line as I had to cull from this 30 years of material, the information that I'm going to share in this program that we'll explore together. So some of it is very experiential, some of it is very knowledge-based, and I have to tell you, my experience is knowledge is experience. When I believe that I understand something because that's what I've been told, and new evidence shows me that something else is actually working, it doesn't work, things don't work the way I've been led to believe, and I have to make that shift in my mind, in my heart, in my emotions, and grasp that new wisdom, that is an experience. It is a direct experience. It's not necessarily an experience of a prayer or an affirmation. It is an experience of a gut shift. Something changes inside of me, and my orientation, the way that I will think of myself and the world changes. I can't think of anything more experiential than that. So when Hay House asked me, Greg, are you going to share some experiential things in here? I said, sure, the whole program. The whole program is experiential. Some of it is heart-based, some of it is mind-based, some of it is marrying those things together, science and spirituality. So why would we do that? Here's the through line for the whole program. My sense is that the better we know ourselves, the better equipped we are to embrace in a healthy way, this is the key, in a healthy way to embrace whatever it is that life brings to our doorstep. I don't know what's going to happen in the world. I don't have a crystal ball. I have a sense of trends and cycles, and we're going to talk about those momentarily. I cannot tell you factually what will happen in the next days, weeks, or months, but what I can tell you is this. The better we know ourselves, the better equipped we are to deal with whatever it is. So rather than trying to prepare for every eventuality that may occur, that'll make you crazy. My sense is that we're best served by becoming the most empowered, fully enabled, fully capable human, using all of the gifts that were given to us from the very beginning, and some of those science is only beginning to understand. You are wired to be extraordinary. You're already an extraordinary being, and you are wired for that extraordinary. And the key is to recognize the potential to unlock those extraordinary capabilities. That is the through line for everything that we're going to do. I'm going to share with you a new understanding of how our physical reality works. Then how do we relate to that physical reality? And then what did our ancestors know? What did they understand about being able to actually access this reality for the healing of our bodies, for example, for the cooperation in families and communities to tip the scales in our favor so that we're less aggressive and we have more cooperation. Extrasensory capabilities, precognition, deep states of intuition, direct access to our subconscious programs. How do we do all of that? As different as they sound from one another, they all boil down to a couple of really powerful discoveries that science has made only recently. And those discoveries validate what our ancestors have said to us for 5,000 years. As we marry these together, that's how we empower ourselves to embrace change in a healthy way. Does that make sense if I say it that way? Okay, thanks. So our first part, I want to talk to you a little about the context of why we are where we are. And we're going to begin with a quote from a man. I have tremendous respect for this man. He's a living visionary, evolutionary biologist, E.O. Wilson. And what E.O. Wilson says to us about our time right now, he said, we are drowning in information while starving for wisdom. That's such a powerful statement. And he could have stopped right there, and it'd be very cool. We could go the whole day with this, but he didn't. And the reason that he continued is why I'm going to share what I'm sharing with you. We are drowning in information while starving for wisdom. We are inundated with data. We have to make sense of it. But here's what he said. He said, the world is different now. He said, the world, from this point forward, it's going to be run by people that he called synthesizers. Everyone watching this program is a synthesizer. You all are synthesizers. What does that mean? A synthesizer is someone who's able to put together just the right information at exactly the right time, think critically about it, and then make important choices wisely. And that's where you and I are today. Have you noticed that it's no longer enough to be an expert in one topic? Have you noticed that? I'll tell you a perfect place where I noticed this. My elderly mother the first time she asked me, she said, Greg, I can't keep track of you. You travel all the time. How do I know where you are in the world? And I said, well, I told you last week. She goes, but that changed because you traveled again this week. I said, well, go to my website. Have you ever tried to explain to an elderly person who is not familiar with computers how to go to a website? It's no longer enough. I mean, now think about this. It's no longer, you can't simply switch on the computer. You've got to know, after you turn on the computer, what operating system you're using. You have to know what browser to use. You have to know how to go to a website, how to use drop-down menus if it's not obvious, if you're going to use a clicker or if you're going to use a mouse pad. It's not enough to be an expert in one thing. We have to know a little bit about a lot of things and then bring them together to get things done. And that is what a synthesizer is, and that is reflected in everything we'll do in this program. I could have come in and simply talked about spiritual traditions, some of them you've heard before, or I could simply share with you the new discoveries of science, some you've heard and some you have not. That's not the way we work. That's not how we learn. So I'm going to marry these together, left and right brain, experience and knowledge, as we go through our program, and it's all about the context. This is why it's so important, because we don't live in a vacuum. We're living in a world that is changing in ways that we have never seen. And we're stretched to find healthy ways to deal with that change. We are living what the experts are now calling a time of extremes. Now, this doesn't mean that only bad things are happening, or even good things for that matter. What it means is that big things, big changes in the world are happening. And because we can no longer separate the world out there from our everyday lives, it means our lives are changing as well. Our world is changing in ways that you and I have never seen. Our parents have never seen. Their parents have never seen. We have no good blueprint to help us understand how to navigate these changes. So we're in uncharted territories. We're doing these things on our own, whether we're talking about climate change or a collapsing global economy or diminishing resources, social upheaval, whatever it is. We've never seen a connected global population trying to deal with the things that we're dealing with right now. What that means is our lives are changing in ways that we simply are not used to. It's happening faster than most of us have been prepared to accept. I just want to say a word about this. In my life, I've been blessed to meet some amazing people. I've met presidents of the United States. I have met spiritual leaders. I have met religious leaders. I've met social architects, engineers, scientists, indigenous elders throughout my lifetime. Every one of these people, and male and female, they've all told me they expect this big change to come in our lifetime. So they know it's coming. And I have to tell you, every one of them, everyone that I've spoken with in the last few years is absolutely blown away at how fast the change is sweeping the earth. Even those people that knew it was coming said, we didn't think it was going to happen so fast. We didn't think it was going to happen like this, not in a single generation. What it means is we've got to now think and live differently, more so than any time in the past, more than we ever have before. So, our time of extremes, that is a big statement to make. And I want to back it up. In the interest of time, we could do an entire program just on what these extremes are all about. What I'm going to say is the extremes are nature's trigger for change, nature's trigger for evolution. Biologists will tell us this, that when everything is going along pretty well, there's no need to change. So systems, individuals, organisms, people, communities, we typically don't change if everything's working okay. You know, why mess with it if it isn't broken? You've heard that. Why mess with it if it ain't broke? That's what you've heard, probably. So the change is pushing us to become the best that we can be so that we can embrace that change. What are these changes all about? Right now, there are three primary extremes that are all converging in the same point in time. And I just want to say there's a reluctance in the mainstream to acknowledge this. The mainstream will look at one extreme or another. They'll look at debt, for example. They'll say, if you can just fix the debt in the world, everything's going to be okay. Or look at climate change. They'll say, if you can just knock the CO2 levels back to where they were 20 years ago, everything's going to be okay, or 50 years, or whatever it is. There's a reluctance to see how these changes are converging in the same window of time and how they're conspiring to push us into new ways of thinking and living. So these three extremes, what are they? Climate is one, the economy is another one, and conflict, cycles of conflict are another one. Now, as I mentioned, we could spend an entire program talking about these. It's beyond the scope of what I can do in the time we have, and I want to explore one of these just so you have a sense. So I've chosen climate change as a geologist, as an earth scientist. I have a passion for this. And here's the reason why. I'm an independent author. I have no allegiance to any corporation, to any religion, to any political campaign. I have nothing to lose by sharing with you the facts as the earth is revealing to us. The facts that earth is revealing to us about our time. And as new facts come to light, I'm happy to embrace those. So I'm going to ask your permission. Can I share a story that's not the most popular story in the mainstream? Are you okay with that? Yes, no? Okay. Well, I want to talk to you about climate. And one of the ways we know about climate of the past, how do we know if the climate is really anomalous today until we compare it to something else? And the question is, how far in the past do you compare? Do you go back 5 years? Do you go back 500 years? Well, I want to tell you, Mother Earth doesn't work on human time scales. So to Mother Earth, 5 or 10 or 15 years is not a drop in the bucket. Geologic time covers hundreds of thousands of millions of years, and we can find out about that through ice cores. Every year there's a new layer of ice that is deposited on the North and the South Poles, Antarctica and the Greenland ice caps. And in that layer is captured stuff from the atmosphere, little pollen grains and particles of dust if there were volcanoes somewhere on the Earth. There are little bubbles in the ice that capture the carbon dioxide levels and the oxygen levels from that year, that moment in time. And then when the ice freezes, when that layer freezes over to become the ice, it's captured and preserved, and another layer is on top of that. Well, scientists drilled, 1999, they drilled through the thickest layer of ice they could find in Antarctica, and even the scientists were amazed because they came up with 420,000 layers of ice. Okay, so here's a trick question. How many years of Earth's history do we now have a record of in the ice to go back and compare today to? Anybody? 420,000 years. This is a really, really good audience. This is what the ice cores look like, if you've never seen one before. And the ice cores are stored in a library. From this library, we can discover all kinds of things. We can find out about the temperature in the past, how high were the sea levels, how strong was the energy from the sun coming to the Earth, how strong was the magnetic field from the Earth, and much more, all kinds of things. We can determine from this. This information is stored in the library, probably unlike anything you've ever seen. There is the Ice Core Library. And I had the opportunity when I was writing the book, Deep Truth, to access the data from this library through the French Polytechnic Institute. So I'm going to share with you 2 quick graphs that tell the whole story about what's happening with climate change right now. This is the first one, and this was published, Energy and Environment, in the year 2008. It's a scientific journal. And what you're looking at, the green, well, this is the year 2000. This is the year 0, so essentially the time of Jesus. Okay, so this is the last 2,000 years. So we're moving from 0 to the year 2000. The green line represents the average temperature of the Earth during that time, and the values above and below show the anomalies. So where are we today? Today, right here, we are a little above the average, so we do have global warming, and I would expect we would see some warming that's happening here. But look at this. In the years 12 to 1300, we had twice the anomaly. The anomaly above the average was twice what it is today. And we go back the years 820 to 1040, it was almost 3 times the anomaly that it is today. And we know that because it is called the MWP. This is the acronym for what is called the medieval warming period. Scientists know this. They know exactly what this was for. So is it warmer today? Yes. Is it warmer than it has ever been? The answer is no. And the question is, what's causing the warming, the probable cause? This is a very, very powerful image. This was taken from the ice cores in Antarctica, and a place called Vostok is the name of the lake under the ice where the ice cores went down. And it looks a little complex, but let me orient you a little bit. When you're seeing this, this is 400,000 years ago. These are in thousands on the bottom. This is today, so we're moving forward. The red are the temperatures of the Earth, and the blue are the levels of carbon dioxide, okay? And I want you to take a look at two of them right here, and I'm going to ask you to tell me something. We're going from this direction forward, so you're going like this. Tell me what comes first as we're going through these changes. Does the red show up first, peak, or does the blue show up and peak first? The red peaks first. The red, the scientists are telling us, this is from a very prestigious journal, Nature, volume 329, October 1987, pages 414 to 418. And I'm saying this because it is peer-reviewed science. It is not a theory, it's not a hypothesis, it's not an opinion. It is accepted fact that Earth is showing us. She's telling us her story. What it's saying is the temperatures rise before the carbon dioxide levels rise. The temperatures rise first. That implies that the carbon dioxide may not be the cause of the temperature rising. Why is this important? And I'm going to be really clear. This isn't about making anyone right or anyone wrong. That's not what this is about. Here's the question. How can we become resilient to the fact of climate change unless we are honest with ourselves about the origin of the change? How can we be resilient in the way we grow our food, in the way populations are distributed, and what we're planning for energy and industry? How can we find that resilience unless we're truly honest with ourselves about what the Earth is showing us? And what this is suggesting is the temperatures rise first, and then the carbon dioxide levels rise secondary. The temperatures rise before the CO2, and it's not our imagination. This is what the Nature article says. When we are going from times of interglacial, that means it's between glaciers, interglacial, into the actual glacial conditions, we're not there yet. We are probably headed in that direction. Now, there's one more very interesting thing. Let's go back and look at this relationship between carbon dioxide and temperature. Look at what's happening here. Can you see this? The blue is the carbon dioxide. When the blue goes up, what happens to the temperature? Temperature is the red. Here's the blue going up. What's the red doing? Right there, look at that. When the blue goes up, what's the red doing? There's a growing body of scientific evidence and a growing consensus that the higher levels of CO2 actually create the cooling and not the warming. And no one's talking about that. And we are not prepared for that in everyday thinking. And I'll tell you who is prepared. The Pentagon knows about this. They have Pentagon studies on abrupt climate change they see as a national security threat. They know, but the public consensus is changing right now. So again, this isn't about right, wrong, good or bad, or why someone has said whatever they've said. This is about being honest, truthful, and factual with ourselves so that we can honor ourselves and be resilient to a change that is with us for our lifetime and our children's. We are not going back to the climate that you and I grew up with in our lifetime, probably not in our children's lifetime. And if this is any indication, look at this. Carbon dioxide goes up, temperatures cool. We are at the highest levels of carbon dioxide that we have seen in a very long time. That suggests the cooling may be greater than we have seen. I'm not saying it's an ice age. Even a little bit of cooling affects how we grow our food, where we grow our food, what industries thrive, and where people live. So it's important. Just about being honest with ourselves. That's all it is. And the data is right there. Now, I'm saying to you, we're living a time of extremes. And this is only one of them. It is driven by cycles. And you say, well, what is the probable cause? If it's not the carbon dioxide, what's causing it? I just want to show you. This is so beautiful. It has been around in the scientific communities for a very long time. It's not popular in mainstream. So you won't see this in your children's textbooks. This is Austrian and Hungarian astronomer Milutin Milankovic. He passed in 1958. He's a brilliant man. And he talked to us about Earth's location in space and cycles. And I just want to do this very, very quickly. I don't want to be technical. And I want to be scientific and factual. What he found is that there are three primary cycles of the Earth that impact the climate and what's happening here in our lives, in our world. One of these is called the precession of the equinox. If you remember the 2012 phenomenon, you heard a lot about this. It's a wobble that takes about 26,000 years to occur. Okay, precession. The other one is eccentricity. Can you see how sometimes the Earth is further away from the sun here, and sometimes it's closer right there? Can you all see that? That's the eccentric orbit. And it ranges between 100 and 400,000 years. And the third is what's called the tilt, or the obliquity. It is about a 41,000-year cycle. So all I want you to see from this is precession, eccentricity, obliquity. And here we are, precession, obliquity, eccentricity. Now instead of looking at Earth and space, we're looking at the waves. Can you all see the waves that we've created here? Now, this next piece is where it all comes together. These are stages of global warming and global cooling, and you can see there's a relationship between the warming, the peaks, and these cycles. And then let me share with you what that is. Right here, you can see when this eccentricity, when that cycle lines up with this cycle, or this cycle lines up with that cycle, we have warming on the Earth. If two of the three cycles align, it creates climate change, and that's exactly what we're experiencing now. You say, well, maybe that is, maybe that's a fluke. Maybe it's just for that one cycle. Well, here's another one. Look on both sides of the peak right there. On this side and on this side, you can see the blue, the eccentricity, lining up with the obliquity on both sides. See with the peaks right here. And both times it happens, we get the warming. It happens all the time. It just doesn't happen in a single lifetime for us to remember it. So where are we now? We are right here. This little eccentricity, that little hump right there, is now lining up with this little obliquity and the precession that just happened in the year 2012. And we have a little bit of global warming. And if you see from the chart, it's less than we've had in the last cycle. It's less than we've had in some of the other cycles. So I would expect we'll see some warming, and I would expect that we'll see some change. And the reason I'm saying this to you is because this climate is the new normal. We are not going back to the climate that we knew in the past. So I've given you an example of why I made the statement. We're living a time of extremes, a new normal. In climate, similar cycles are driving conflict. Conflict cycles are ramping up right now. We're seeing this all over the world. And economic cycles that go in waves that cover so much time. You're not going to see it in a single Wall Street cycle of a 30-day cycle or a 4-year business cycle. These are much larger cycles. So what's happening now is we are living a time of extremes. It's the convergence of these three cycles in a big way that impact our personal everyday lives. How we live, where we live, the way we think about our future, how we prepare for our future, economically, how we save for retirement, how we plan for our children's education, or taking care of our elderly parents. All of these things are impacted. All of a sudden, these big changes in the world out there become very personal to us. The big changes in the world become very personal to us. My mom has, her health is deteriorating very quickly. And when we used to have these conversations, she would say this to me all the time. She'd look at me and she'd say, "Are you going to take another trip to do another program?" And I'd say, "Yeah, why?" And she'd say, "Well, be careful out there." And I'd say, "Why is that?" And she goes, "Because the world is going to hell in a handbasket." How many of you have heard that before? Going to hell in a handbasket. What does it even mean? I mean, when you think about it, I don't even know what it means. I know the intent. I know what she's saying. She's concerned about me, but the actual statement, I'm not even really sure what it means. But it's easy. It's easy for us to sense that the world is coming apart at the seams until we step back, look at the big picture. And when we see that, you say, of course, we're living this convergence of cycles. We must think and live differently than we did before those cycles were converging. My sense is that when the facts are clear, our choices become obvious. When the facts are clear, our choices become obvious. And I think one of the greatest things that we can do to honor ourselves, one another, and our children and future generations is to be honest and truthful and factual with ourselves, because then we have the opportunity to empower ourselves to embrace this change in a healthy way, rather than trying to fight the change. Have you noticed everything is based in conflict? The war on climate. Have you noticed how we've turned climate change into a war? It's all about conflict. Or the war on debt. This is a very, very different way of thinking. I'm going to show you where this comes from. But before we do that, in our time of extremes, what I want to say is there's a lot of really good news. And this is why I think this is so important. Good news, a lot of really good things happening here. We already have all the solutions for all the problems that our time of extremes has presented to us. I love to say this. in front of an audience and look into your eyes, and people say, really, how come we don't know about those things? There's a sense, I was just in Europe recently, and there was a sense that we need to get all the great minds in the world together in a room in a think tank so that they can figure out the answer to all the problems that we're being faced with today. And I said, we've already done that. We did that in the 20th century. We already have all the solutions. The technological solutions we already have. Let me give you some examples. For example, we already have all the food we need to feed every mouth of every child, every man, every woman on the face of the earth. There is no shortage of food today, and the United Nations tells us, unless something changes, like abrupt climate change, that we will have food security for another 50 years at least. So it is not the lack of food that is the reason that our global family, members of them, are going to bed hungry every night. It's not the lack of food, it's because it is yet to become a priority to get that food to the people that need it. That is the reason that people are going hungry. We already have all the food. We already have the technology to build safe, clean, efficient, and sustainable electricity and to bring it into every home of every family that wants it. Not every family wants electricity. I spend time in places in the world where they don't have electricity in their homes and they prefer not to. But everyone, the indigenous peoples, but everyone that wants electricity, we know how to do this. And look at this. We can do it with zero greenhouse gases and with no fossil fuels. We've had the technology to do this over 60 years. We've had this technology. So we don't have to figure this one out. We already know how it works. We already have everything we need to create strong economies and to heal the rift that's created in our communities, in our families, in our societies, even between nations, from broken economies based on false assumptions such as competition and conflict. We're going to talk about that in this program, and you'll see why those assumptions are no longer working, why they're unsustainable, and what new discoveries are showing us can replace them in healthy, sustainable ways. We already have the knowledge to reverse disease. You're going to see that in this program. You're going to see that every organ in the human body is now documented with the ability to heal and repair itself, or repair and then heal itself. Even the organs we were told could not, like spinal cord tissue, pancreatic tissue, brain tissue, heart tissue. Every organ is now documented with the ability to heal itself. However, the organ must be given the environment that supports the healing. And that environment has a lot to do with the way you and I think, feel, our emotions, and how they permeate the cells of our bodies. And that's something that simply isn't taught in mainstream medicine or mainstream classrooms today. But our ancestors knew it, and we have that information now. We already know how to build communities that are really healthy and sustainable. We know, for example, and we don't have to guess because communities like this one already exist. In northern Arizona, 5,000 people live in this community. They grow 100% of their own food. They produce 100% of their own energy, and they have a 100% employment rate because everyone that chooses to work is employed supporting and sustaining the food that they're growing and the electricity that they're creating. And this is only one community. There are others, and they're not all in America. I've seen these in Europe. I've seen them in South America as well. The point is we already know how to do all these things. So if I say that to you, I'm just going to ask, if I say to you, we already have these technologies, we already know how to do these things, what is the question that comes to you almost immediately in your mind? Somebody say it out loud. What is the question? Well, exactly. Where is it? Where are those things today? Where are the solutions? And I had the same question. That's how I knew that you would have the question, because you and I are very similar. Where are they? Why are they just in little pockets? Why isn't the whole world embracing these? And that brings us to what may perhaps be the greatest crisis of all. Yes, we're living a time of extremes, these three converging cycles, but maybe there's something even greater. And I think it's a place it's hard for humans to embrace this magnitude of change precisely for this reason. It's a crisis in thinking. You and I are steeped in a story, a scientific story, a cultural story, a spiritual story about who we think we are, our relationship to our bodies, to the world, to the past, how to get things done, how to make things work. We're steeped in a story. That story is based on assumptions that are now being overturned by the best science of the 21st century. So we can say they are false assumptions. We have built our world. We've built our communities, entire societies, the economic system, the corporate systems, the medical systems. Huge systems that we depend upon in our lives are built on these false assumptions that are now being overturned, and it's hard. It's hard to let go of those old ideas and embrace the new ones. So here's my question. How can we possibly thrive in this new world? And I believe that's where we're going. I have never been more optimistic about our time. I've never been more optimistic about this nation, America, or all nations, because I speak in many nations. I've never been more optimistic about our world than I am right now, and here's the reason why. Because now we know what does not work. We know what doesn't work because we have a world built based upon false assumptions, unsustainable ways of thinking and living. I've just described some to you. We know what doesn't work, and as those systems break down, do we have the wisdom to replace them with what does work? And that's the question that you and I are answering right now. How can we possibly thrive in this new world if we're waiting for the old world to return? I'm going to invite you to think about that. How can you embrace new ideas and new ways of living if your emotions, if your psyche is filled with the ideas of the world that used to be, what should be happening, the way things should work? If we are clinging to an idea of a world that used to be and we're waiting for that world to come back, where is the room to embrace all the new, beautiful things that are available to us today? That's a huge idea. I want to just share a story with you. Sometimes a story is the best way to really anchor an idea. My wife and I'll just tell you, my wife's name is Martha, so now I can call her Martha and stop saying my wife and identifying her by our relationship. My wife Martha and I live in a rural community in northern New Mexico where I have lived pretty much since I left the corporations. And it's a beautiful part of the world. It's very high elevation. We live about 8,000 feet above sea level. It's called high desert. It's very dry, maybe 9 to 12% humidity. Deep, beautiful blue skies because you're so close to the higher elevations, or you have that much less atmosphere between you and the blue sky. I know you all have seen it before. So not long ago, we took a drive up through the mountains in the mining communities in northern New Mexico and southern Colorado to see the leaves were turning. It was just a beautiful autumn day. And we stopped at a convenience store to get gas in my old truck. And I went into the convenience store to pay. Martha stayed in the vehicle. And I asked the cashier, I said, how are things in this community? It was a small mining community. About 2/3 of the people that are of age where they are working in the community work in the mines. So the mines, they're heavily dependent on these mines. And I said, how are things? How is the economy here? How are things going? And she didn't even look up from the cash register. She said, do you really want to know? And I said, yeah, I want to know. I wouldn't have asked you if I didn't want to know. And then she looked right at me and she said, when the mines are open, she said, life is great. Money is good. Job security is good. People feel secure. She said they feel so secure they're willing to take risks. They'll take out a loan and build a new home or add on to the existing home. They'll take out a loan and they'll send their kids to school. They'll make more babies and have bigger families, so they need to add more rooms onto their home as they're doing this. She said, but when the mines are closed, life is hell, absolute hell. She said, everything stops. She said, people are afraid because they don't know when those mines are going to open again. So everything stops. They stop building their homes. They stop having larger families. They stop sending their kids to college. They can't prepare for their retirement. And I said, well, what do people do while that's happening? She says, they will do anything they can to get by, waiting for the mines to reopen. Here's the key. Waiting for things to get back to normal. Waiting for things to get back to normal. And I said, that's got to be really, really tough. I said, how long have the mines been closed this time? She said, well, this time around, she said, it's been 9 years. 9 years. That's exactly what I said. 9 years. These people put their lives on hold, waiting for things to get back to normal. And while they're waiting, life is passing them by, and they are not thriving in the new world and embracing all those good things. They're clinging. They're struggling. This is where the struggle comes from. And I'm not saying it's their fault. I'm just using this as an example. I got back into the truck and I said to Martha, I said, I think I just witnessed in this little town something on a small scale that we see on a micro scale, a microcosm. I think I just witnessed in this little town a microcosm of what many people are experiencing throughout the world today. There is a sense, and maybe you know this if you're watching this program, maybe you know people like this, or maybe it's you. And I talk to people all over the world that share this story with me that I'm going to share with you. There's a sense that everything was kind of chugging along okay. I mean, life had its ups and downs, but everything was going along pretty well, and then something happened. And for some people, that something was 9/11. For other people, it was the economic crash of 2008. But the point is that something happened that was anomalous, and those people are waiting for things to get back to normal from that anomaly. Okay, they're waiting for things to get back to normal. How can we embrace the new possibilities that allow us to thrive if we're waiting for the old world to return? Does that make sense if I say it to you that way? So this is important. And this is important because it's a big part of what we're going to do in here today. Our world changed, and no one told us. The world changed, no one told us. I wish they had a special on CNN or BBC World or whatever, Flash. The world you used to know is gone. Say goodbye. It will never come back, and embrace a new world. Seriously, in mainstream, because it would help us through the process of embracing that change. But that has never happened. The world changed. We no longer live in isolated countries. We don't live in the climate of 10, 15, 20 years ago. I can tell you this in northern New Mexico. The rains don't come when they used to come. Farmers and ranchers, agriculturalists that have lived there 300 or 400 years. Santa Fe was founded 400 years ago, and many of the families were there in that first wave. And they have that history that goes back that long. For the first time, they're selling the farms, they're selling the ranches, because the rains no longer come when they used to. They can't support the crops, they can't support the animals. And that is how different things are in that part of the world right now. We no longer live in the economy of the past. Let me ask you a question. You've all seen economies have problems before, and you know our economy is in trouble right now, right? Everybody know that? Yes, no? That's not a secret, right? Okay, I didn't want to be the first to tell you if it was a secret. So we've all seen economies in trouble in the past. And we've all seen when one nation has a bad economy and goes broke, another nation may come in and bail them out. We've all seen that. What happens when the debt, the combined debt of the entire planet, is so great that it is more than what is being created, the wealth that is being created? When the debt exceeds the GDP for an entire planet, who bails out a planet? I don't know the answer to that. We're about to find out, because that's where we are right now. That's where we are right now. We no longer live in the economy of the past. We don't live in the wellness model of the past. Our lives have all changed. The way we used to think about money is changing. Money does not mean the same thing today that it meant 15 or 20 years ago. And if we're still thinking about money in the same way, that's where the struggle comes from. The role that money plays in our lives is changing. Our jobs, industry, jobs and careers are changing. Maybe you've noticed the loyalty that people used to have in a company. I remember when I was in the industry, when I first started working Phillips Petroleum back in the 1970s, there was this tremendous pride and loyalty for people in other oil companies, and we would meet them at conferences. And everyone was so proud to be working for the company they worked for that they wouldn't even imagine going to work for another company. When I was working for Cisco Systems in the 90s, that changed. I remember our office was in Silicon Valley, California. And I remember looking at the lunch hour out the window, you could literally see employees with file folders with their resumes walking from one building to another over the lunch hour and coming back and then grabbing a quick bowl of soup out of the machine because they were just going for where the best paycheck was. That whole idea of loyalty had changed. The way we think about industry, jobs, careers, it's all changed. The way we think about religion and spirituality, it's all changed. The way we think about health and healing, the way we think about security, all of that has changed. The world changed and no one told us. So many people, consciously and subconsciously, are waiting for things to get back to normal. And that plays a role in how we live our lives. Our new normal requires a new kind of thinking. So I'm going to ask you a question right now. Your question, are you holding on to the past? And it's not just about community, and it's not just about industry. It's about people, it's about relationships, and what's happened in our lives. Are you holding on to the past? Have you mourned what you've lost? And this is where I'm going to go with this. Because there is a reluctance in the mainstream media, mainstream television, mainstream documentaries, mainstream classrooms, mainstream textbooks, because there is a reluctance to acknowledge the fact that we are living the convergence of these cycles, because there is a reluctance to acknowledge the fact that the world we used to know is gone and we are now living a new normal. Because of that reluctance, we have never been given the opportunity to mourn the passing of the world and the people and the places that were familiar to us in the past and that no longer exist in that way. We've no longer been given that opportunity. Now, what do I mean by that? Am I talking about grief or am I talking about mourning? I'm going to make a distinction here. When we lose something, grief is our inner experience, our inner thoughts and feelings of that loss. Okay, so we can have an inner grief. The mourning is how we express that grief. Let me give you a perfect and very personal example. This is not scripted. I didn't know I was going to talk about this, and it's very present with me right now, so I will. I mentioned my mom's health is failing very quickly. I'm losing my mom. And I wasn't ready for that. I always thought we would have a lot more time together and do the things, just little things. We used to get together. I'd come home from the airport, and we'd stop at the Village Inn and have a bowl of oatmeal together. Just little stuff like that. So I'm losing my mom right now. And I know that. But I had never made room for the fact that I would lose her twice. I'm losing her once in the way that I've always known her, as her memory disappears and everything that she relates to and our past as that disappears. I'm losing her that way. And when she passes this world in her physical body, I'm going to lose her again. Now, intellectually, of course, I know that. I'm on the road, I'm touring, I'm going to airports, I'm on the stage. I know that. So I've had the grief of what that's all about. I only recently learned that I had to find a way, some way to express that. And it doesn't have to be a big outward ceremony or a huge breakdown in the shower with alligator tears or anything. Although for me, that's kind of the way it happened. But what I found was this. My body, physiologically, my body began to respond to my grief that had not been expressed as mourning. I'm a healthy man, and I work hard to be at my best so that I can be at my best for you. When you and I agree to meet on a stage somewhere in the world, my promise to you is that I will be present, focused, and at my very best, and we can then share whatever's going to come through in that day. And I have all kinds of routines and rituals that I go through to help me be in that place. Things began to break down. And it's interesting because as long as I was on stage, everything was okay. And it was when I went home for 10 days, I said, okay, now I've got 10 days off. My body said, 10 days off? Cool. You don't have to be on the stage, no cameras, anything like that. How about a breakdown right now? So it was unexpected. So what began happening for me, it was very physiological. It was heart palpitations and anxiety and things like that. And I said, I've never had this in my life. And I noticed a pattern, being the pattern recognizer that I am. Sometimes I'm a little slow on the uptake. I noticed every time I would go to visit my mom, by the time I got home, I would start having these problems. And I said, could they be related? Well, I had gone for a physical, and of course the doctor, I tell you exactly, they want to start throwing a bunch of drugs. And I said, thank you for your opinion. I've never taken them in the past. I think the side effects would be worse than the drug. So I began looking at some alternative kinds of things and people that could help me. And they very quickly helped me understand that I needed to acknowledge, it's not enough to know it, I needed to acknowledge that I'm losing my mom twice. And as soon as I did that, literally the day that I allowed for that acknowledgement, all the symptoms disappeared. But my body had never given me I'd never given my body the opportunity to have that experience. So I'm just using this as an example. It's not just about the big things that are happening. It's about the personal things that are happening as well. And it can be about the big things. Martha and I had this conversation recently about our world was changing. I have worn boots since the day I was born in northern Missouri, and I never throw them away. I had a pair of boots yesterday. The crew saw them. I've had for over 30 years. I love my boots. And I've always loved knowing that most communities I go to, if my boots have a problem, I can walk into a little mom and pop store and they can put a new heel while I wait, or they can fix the sole, or if there's a place that's rubbing on my leg, they can take care of that. Those little stores are gone. Have you noticed the mom and pop shops are all, and I miss that. And I've never really acknowledged that. So I was talking to Martha and I said, these are the kinds of things I miss. I said, what do you miss? Martha and I, it's very interesting. Sometimes if I ask her a question, there's this long pause. It's called a delayed response, is actually what it's called. And it took us a while to figure out that Martha is a delayed response person. So if I ask the question, I know I can go make my cup of tea. And when I come back patiently, that response may be there. So I asked Martha, I said, what do you miss? What do you miss about our world? And she had this long, pregnant pause, delayed response. And then she nailed it like she always does. And when she comes back, she just nailed it. She said, you know what I miss the most? She said, yeah, I miss the things you're talking about. She said, what I miss the most is waking up in the morning knowing that when I go to bed at the end of this day, I will have accomplished everything that I need to accomplish at the end of the day. She said, that never happens anymore. I know that no matter how much I do, before I go to bed at night, if I look at my emails, somebody is going to ask me to do something else. Something will be undone when I go to bed tonight. Do you all relate to that? You know, that's the worst thing you can do is look at your emails like 5 seconds before you go to bed and see all the requests that are out there. So she's missing that way of living and that way of life. So it covers a lot of ground, personal, in our family, society, mourning the expression. How do we do that? Sometimes it's simply the acknowledgement of what that's all about. I'd like to take this opportunity because we're talking about this. We're talking about it now. How many of you have ever taken the time to mourn the things that you've lost in your lives over the last 5, 10, 15 years? Personal, collective. How many have not? How many feel like this would be a good time to do some of that? That's why we're here. That's why we're talking about it. The better we know ourselves, the better equipped we are to embrace change in a healthy way. When we embrace change in a healthy way, we call that resilience. It's our ability to do just that, to embrace change in a healthy way. Let me help you understand. I don't want to get technical, but I want you to see exactly what we're talking about here. What is resilience specifically? This is a study that was done. It was done by the Institute of Heart Math a pioneering research organization based in Northern California, exploring the power of the human heart in new and exciting ways. We're going to talk about HeartMath a lot as we go through this material and the work that they are doing. This was a study that they conducted over 60 days. What they found is this: when we are faced with a new challenge in life, something new, it can be a new job, it can be the loss of a job, a new relationship, the loss of a relationship, the loss of a loved one, having Hay House give you a contract to write a new book and now realizing that you have a book that's due within 60 days, and I don't even know where that came from, but anything new in your life. Here's how we typically respond. What we do is this: when we first embrace that change, we're up for it. We've got the energy. The first 10 days, look at this. This is called the resilience curve. That first 10 days, man, we're up for it. We're going for it. We're doing all the work. I'm just going to pick up on what I left off with my mom to illustrate my experience with this, because when my mom was diagnosed in a way that said they didn't know what was wrong with her, but that I would be losing her. They said, we can't tell you what's wrong, but we can show you on the scans her brain tissue is disappearing. It's not like it's shrinking, it's dissolving, it's evaporating, it's disappearing. And as it goes, it will take certain functions with it. And I'm a scholar, I'm a scientist. My first response was what? Get on the internet, right? On the internet and do some research. So this first 10 days, man, I am all over the internet. I am looking to see what people know about this and what the studies are telling us. So I'm going to use myself as an example here. That first 10 days, tremendous amount of energy. And it wasn't exactly 10 days, but it was somewhere in there, things kind of plateau. And this is what scientists say we do. We plateau based on the resilience that we have available to us in that moment. If you can think of resilience as the batteries, the emotional batteries that you have in your body, and your ability to keep those batteries charged at an optimum level. And just like if you throw old batteries out and then you get new batteries that have a higher capacity, as we learn new tools to deal with change, we have a higher capacity for resilience. That's what we're talking about right here. So most people, sometime from this 10 to the 30, 40 days, they plateau, and then they begin to decline. You call it emotional exhaustion, right? And we've all seen this happen. Fortunately for me, I didn't have to experience these things because I had tools that I'm going to be sharing with you. And what those tools allowed me to do. This is the curve of resilience in dealing with a specific life challenge. Our goal in this program is to take whatever curve we have, you all have some degree of resilience. You've got it right now. You've already got it. So it's not like you don't have it. Our goal is from wherever you are right now to do this, to increase the baseline, to create more resilience, to charge those batteries to a greater degree. And the goal of doing that is to raise our baseline of resilience so that we can embrace change in a healthy way. Whatever change it is, whether it's a big change in the world or whether it's change in our personal lives or our health or whatever it is. That's what we're doing right here. The way that we do that is through direct techniques that have been time-proven and tested in the laboratory to help our bodies physiologically embrace change. Resilience happens for us on a personal level and also on a social and a community level. I'm going to focus on personal change, and with that, I'm going to close out this segment of our program right now. This is what I wanted to say to you in this portion of our program. So what did we just do together? Number one, I identified the fact we're living this time of extremes, and I shared with you why that's happening and the converging cycles that are causing it. Number two, the extremes have created a new normal for all intents and purposes. The world that we have today, it's the world that we will have for the rest of our lifetimes. It's the world that our children will have for the rest of their lifetimes. So rather than waiting for the old world to come back and struggling by resisting what's here, we are honoring ourselves by embracing the fact that this is the new normal, and we simply happen to be the generation that's living it, and that we already have all the solutions we need, but the thinking is the key to embrace those solutions in a new and healthy way.